So my name is Young. I am the Clinical Applications Manager at Lawndale Christian Health Center. We're a federally qualified health center. Um, and a lot of our work with kind of wireframing and building things is related to our electronic medical record system. So for me, what I'm really hoping to get out of this is to kind of be able to provide some kind of a broader kind of philosophy on how we design forms so that it's intuitive for our users, it's gathering the necessary data elements that we need to capture for reporting purposes, and just all around creating things that are both functional and fun to look at, and things that people enjoy using and not just have to use. We do build a lot of custom forms. We've been using the same EHR system for the last 13 years, 12, 13 years. So we're pretty familiar with what it's capable of and what it's not. And so, yeah, it allows for a lot of customizability where we have, let's say, a new program or a new grant or a new workflow, and we're able to kind of map the entire piece from start to finish, from who are the users who are inputting the data to what data elements do we need at the end, and making sure that from start to finish, everything is kind of seamless. So yeah, that's me and what kind of,
okay.
Yeah.
Great. And so you say you already have a good process for that. You feel like you have a good sense of who the users are and what their needs are, and mapping that to the elements on the form.
Yes.
Okay. And this is, you're not developing the EHR system, but you're using some kind of like a form builder within an existing EHR system. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, we're not building the EHR system. Our EHR system does allow for quite a bit of programming abilities. So they have a kind of a native language, like programming language that they have. And so we're decently familiar with both using a form builder application and also the native programming language.
Okay.
So it allows for quite a bit of flexibility.
And what would you say are the main challenges that you're facing now? Is it, I'll give you some examples. Is it a lack of, say, user interface design expertise? Is it more of a process challenge or a communication issue?
Rachel, feel free to jump in. I think I would say, I think we're doing a good job. I think we're, being very mindful of all the different users and the different, stakeholders. But just wanting to make sure that as we're building things that we're not missing out on being mindful of certain elements, whether it's, I'm not too worried about communication. I guess just basic design of forms, making it both usable and intuitive to users. But also I think one challenge for me is I feel like we're constantly making changes and updating things. And so kind of on our internal side, what are the ways that we can make that process and the documentation around that more streamlined for us internally?
And are those changes and updates, are you making them because they're required or necessary, or do you feel like you can somehow reduce the number of, are some of those changes as a result of not doing things optimally in the first place?
Most of the changes that are coming in are because we're either we need to make them because they're program changes or kind of other factors that are pushing those changes, or other times it's just optimization, where we realize, oh, we didn't code this out properly to begin with, or we found a new way to do this. But I would say most of our changes are due to workflow changes, and then making sure our forms align with that.
And what are the struggles from your users as with this, or how do your users how are they affected by this?
see for our users. I think it's a lot of training burden.
Mm-hmm.
Every time things change, we have to make sure everyone who is going to be affected by those changes are aware and not only aware of the changes, but aware of how this new flow works.
Mm-hmm. So how can how can user interface design or better design of the forms help your users? What is the what's the thing that would really what's one thing that if you could that you would like to change in order to make things better, make your lives better?
Yeah, I feel like the the ideal for any sort of form change is that it's so intuitive that it doesn't even need training. I don't know if you're ever gonna always hit that mark right on the head, but making things intuitive either just from the get-go, or even if you do need to make changes that do need to retrain users, making it so simple so that the training is really just, hey, FYI, this thing changed. We don't really need to tell you how to use it because it's so obvious.
And what do you think makes your forms challenging? Is it their complexity, the number of fields, the type of fields, or the kind of obscurity or the obscure nature of some of the labels or the terminology?
I think for us internally, for our team, there can be a lot of clinical and logical complexity behind the forms. But for the users, it can feel like a lot of clicking. And unfortunately, I think just being in the healthcare field in general, we're just required to capture a lot of data, and we can automate as much of that as possible. So we, if there are, if then logical situations, we just automatically push, values as much as we can. But for a lot of things, it just requires users to actually, fill out the forms.
And have you heard from your users what has been their feedback on them? Do they say that, oh, these forms are hard to use, or I don't understand something, or they're too long? If your users could talk about their experience with the forms, what do you think that, two-part questions, what would they say, and what do you think that you have control over, given that a lot of these are just necessary fields?
Yeah, I think honestly, when we get feedback about our forms, a lot of times the feedback is usually pretty positive because we're able to match our forms to the workflows that they're doing, or using forms to build custom workflows that make their work actually easier. I feel like a lot of the feedback we get is, oh, I actually really like this form because it allows me to do exactly what I'm trying to do, which is what we want to hear. And other times we do have a mix of totally custom forms as well as forms that we've gotten from other organizations who have built them out. And so for some of those forms, we have limited editing capabilities. And so when users ask, oh, can it do this? Can we do that? Because we've done similar things for our own forms, but we're not able to do that for these forms. I think a lot of times that's the feedback where we know it's possible, but for this particular form, we can't do it because it's not ours, and we don't have that capability to edit.
Got it. And so how about on the design side of things? Do the people who are creating these forms struggle with knowing where to put fields or how to design the forms?
And that's, I think that's where, I guess that's, to clarify, I think that's really what I'm hoping for this, because that's us. We're the team that does that design. And none of us have any training in, usability or UI. And I think we do a decent job of making things flow in a logical way. But just hoping to kind of glean from you all of kind of more bigger picture philosophy of like, how does that design process, how can we kind of do better on that front end of designing something that that flows well. But yeah, I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. I don't know if Rachel or Grace or Andrew, y'all have things you want to chip in with.
Yeah, I think essentially And hi, this is Rachel. I'm the VP of Health IT and supervise Young and this team. So I think we've tried to do, basically in a nutshell, for the last 12 years with this product, we've tried to be agile, lean, Six Sigma, whatever you want to call it, in the very nonprofit, not actually officially getting certified in UX or anything like that. So we glean these concepts from what we see in the field, while also trying to constrain them within the framework of this product that has a proprietary coding system. So even if I put an HTML developer in front of it, they would be learning a different language that only exists with the CMR. And so from a look and feel perspective, we've always struggled with that, in that you're stuck on design-wise. And our EMR platform is starting to accept HTML content, but it's not at the level that you would see in a much larger EHR, and that is not the primary framework on which everything sits. And so we're always stuck somewhat in this proprietary box that's built on a language that's about 25 years old. So it's one of those things that we have tried to push it as far as it can possibly go and try to be user-centered, but we're still within that framework of a specific EMR that has a specific use case that has the constraints applied to it by the database architecture and then the language that we use to program it. So it's always helpful to hear generally outside of that constraint. Is there a different way that we could think about this? Are we missing something from a UX perspective? Could we try a different approach or bring in something that, we've sort of pieced it together ourselves. We're not a design company,
right?
Nor are we a development firm. We're a healthcare center that's made significant investments in our own IT, and we have people on site that can do these things, but it's not the same as hiring a developer. And so we want to see if we can take the things that you all learn from working with all of your customers and just general best practice, and see what can be applied. The other thing too is we have potentially a lot of different use cases for wireframing. We found our way to Balsamiq a couple of years ago. I think Young found it online and we started playing around with it and we really liked it. And we use it in certain contexts, but I mean, honestly, we like the product. I could see us using this in lots of different areas, if we can get people thinking in that way. So I feel like it's helpful to hear the perspective of how do you think in this way and how do you move the design process start to finish.
Got it.
As Young said, we think we do it pretty well, but we're not officially UX people by any means.
Yeah, and what you're describing is very, very common, where people who are hired to build things, create things, are basically become de facto designers, because developing is design. I mean, anytime you make something, you have to design it. So yeah, it sounds like what would be really useful is to have some kind of template library or best practices or some kind of rules around what type of form controls to use in which scenarios, so that there was kind of a rule book or a guidebook, so that every time you created a form, you didn't have to kind of start from scratch and think about it in advance. There was just kind of a go-to guide for, if it's this type of field, then it always looks like this, or something like that. Is that, would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting, I haven't thought about what you just said, but that's a helpful framing of, yeah, if we actually worked at a tech company, the designer and the builder would be two different people.
Right.
You can see this is the team right here. So that's all we have. It is N of one from a department perspective. We don't hand it off to another development team to actually build it. We're doing that whole process in-house. So yeah, maybe even just hearing more about that process. And we've, over the last couple of years, tried to be a little bit more consistent, even with things like branding and colors and sizes and where fields are laid out. Because this is something people are looking at 10, 12 hours a day, and even just the strain of that alone. So if there's concepts from that too that we can learn.
But given that it sounds like you've been using this for a long time, and even if you did bring in an outside designer, you probably have so much knowledge and expertise that I think you would probably be the experts, at least for, you probably know a lot about about your users and about the technology and about, you probably have some maybe better intuition about form design than you think, just because you've been doing it for so long. You know, would you say that there is enough collective wisdom on your team to create some kind of design style guide or you know, framework that of all the different, it might be useful to have some guidelines for all of the different types of form controls and when and how they should be used, just kind of some standardization, if you will. You know, would you say that you run into a problem where every form is kind of designed anew, like from scratch? You know, how much are you reusing things both from a technology point of view and also from a knowledge point of view? How much are you saying, oh, I did something similar on a previous form that worked well, and so I'm just going to apply that same rationale and reasoning? How much are you leveraging your existing expertise?
From a code perspective, because the language is so specific and proprietary all the time. If you write a function that works in one form, you're going to use it for another. From a design perspective, however, I feel like it's more likely that we're doing it from scratch. Sometimes that's because we're taking something that's, and young guys, feel free to chime in. You're the ones actually building this. Yeah, sometimes it's a situation where we had it because we've had the same platform for 12 years, where we took something 10 years old and said, you know what, this needs to be looked at again. And we apply the things we know now 10 years later that are much more robust than they were previously, and update it that way. Part of it too is that the things we are building are for these highly customized use cases. It's because there's nothing in default or by default or that we could purchase from somebody else that works well. And so we're saying, all right, which can be an arduous process because we're also kind of telling people they can have whatever they want, like dream a little bit, tell us where you want to click, what you want it to look like. And I feel like that's the part that takes a while too, is going through drafting, putting it in front of someone, and then having them look at it and decide and translating what they want. So yeah, I mean, we have a little bit of a design concept, sort of. Like we're now using we have a branding guide and a style guide that our marketing team uses. And so we're using that now to influence field colors and the general layout. But we could probably do more on that front for sure.
And drilling into like really specifics, like what are the you know, specific decisions that you struggle with? Is it, how do I style this control? Is it, which control do I use? Is this a text field, a text box, a drop-down control, radio buttons, checkboxes? Or is it what labels to use? How do I, or what logic do I use? Or do I use some help fields? You know, when the, you know, whoever is the designer is actually going through the process, what are the things that the specific design challenges that they struggle with or feel like they don't have enough knowledge to do well?
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily have a ton of issues figuring out what types of fields, whether it's like checkbox or radio buttons or whatever. I think the biggest struggle is, yeah, kind of like you said, most of the time, sometimes we are able to take an old form and just repurpose it and just change the labels and change some logic or the data behind it. But for the most part, whenever we're wireframing a new form, it is such, like Rachel said, such custom workflows that we're just starting from a blank canvas and kind of building it piece by piece by piece. And like we know what those pieces should be as we're building it out. But it's building it out, you know, label by label by label, next tab, next page, and so on.
I see. So you think that your wireframing process could be enhanced to speed up to get to the point where where it looks the way that you want it to look, at least to then hand off to or pass on to the developing stage?
So I think potentially, yeah.